Good morning and God bless you. I'm Jeff Corrigan from Essential Conversations, the consultants coordinating the Diocese of San Angelo planning process. Bishop Sis began the planning process in the fall with listening sessions and the survey that you'll both get to hear the results from today. And thanks for taking time out of your Saturday to be part of this webinar. If you could join me in a brief prayer as we get started, to ask the Holy Spirit to come down and join us as we examine the data, think through all the results, and begin to think about what we're going to do about all this. Please say with me and pray with me, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. So thanks again for taking part of your Saturday to be part of the webinar. Today we're going to unpack what we learned from the Diocese of San Angelo survey and listening sessions held in the fall. And we found a lot of interesting results, so you'll have a lot of data coming at you this morning. So if you find yourself confused or have a question, write down the question in the question box feature that's on your screen and send it to me. I'll try to integrate an answer into the presentation. And in addition, this webinar will be recorded, so you can come back and watch it again if you missed something. And at the end of the initial presentation, I'm going to go back and pull out a few slides for you to consider as we look for questions. So let's begin. Let's start first by looking at who took this survey. This is what we call demographics. First, we had a good spread of age, at least in the age 30 to 79 categories. Now, the education level, I'll give you a minute to look at that. I'm going to go too fast. You see, we've got a good spread there from 30 to 79. And let's look at the education level here. Now, this is interesting at how high the undergraduate and postgraduate degree is. I went back and looked what the average is in the state of Texas, and we have in our survey about double what the average is in the state of Texas of college-educated undergraduate degree or more. So that's going to be important as we look at the differences between groups. It's going to be important to look at that education question because we have so many people with a lot of higher education, we end up skewing the average towards that group. And we find that with any group that we have a lot of. So that's why we're not just going to show you the averages here. We're going to also look at what are the differences between the different groups. So now let's look at race. We see white, or what some people call Caucasian, 49%, not a majority, and Hispanic Latino at 43%, also not a majority, but both of these groups are really close to being half. But when we get down to Asian, Native American, Black, or African American, and we had a handful of Black respondents, that 0% is that it was less than 0.5%. And then 5% gave no response. So as we go through this data, we are not going to get into the groups that are 3% or less. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through those results. Okay, now let's look at sex. Interesting, 2/3 female. Which weights the survey heavily towards female respondents. But something you should also take into consideration is when you look around the pews on Sunday, is it majority female? So it's not too far off. It probably is weighted a little bit too much towards women respondents. But again, this is not too far off what's in the pews. Now, here's an interesting category: the role of faith in our lives. Okay, we have my faith is at the center of my life and I base all my important decisions on it. That group is 48%. So we have a pretty strong faith group here. If you look at the lower group, faith is not an important part of my life. That's 4%. No, that's actually 1% of the respondents. And I'm exploring and trying to determine what role my faith plays in my life. That's 4%. You know, we had well over 800 people respond. So here we've got percentages, but please know that there was quite a lot of people that took the survey. So we will be able to pull out something from that I am exploring and trying to determine what role my faith plays in my life group. There are enough of them to make some sense of it, but that group that's faith is not an important part of my life, 1%, didn't respond. So if we're looking to understand what this group thinks, this survey is not going to provide the answers to that. We see the other groups. I want my faith to be more central in my life than it is now. That's at 16%, and 29%. My faith is one of several central elements in my life. So we'll compare those groups as we go on. Okay, so what I'm first going to do, this is the questions that ask respondents how important it is for their parish to focus on these specific items in the coming 5 years. Now we've got this table. It's a lot of numbers here, but I want to draw your attention to the blue column, what we're calling the importance index. This is when we add the percentage of people said that the item was important to the percentage of people that said it's very important, we get the importance index. So we can see teaching children about the Catholic faith. 37% said important, 56% said very important. We get that importance index of 93. And that's how I've ranked them, is by the importance index. So we see the first three, of course, are teach children about the Catholic faith, teach adults about the Catholic faith, focus on youth and young adults, and that makes the top three. Where at the bottom, reaching out to non-practicing Catholics, we have 72% for the importance index, offer more times for confession at 53%, and using technology more effectively at 51%. So you can see those last three are not, a majority of people say they're important, right? They say either they're important or very important. But when you compare them to the questions at the top, teaching children about the Catholic faith, there's important differences there. Now, keep in mind, this is the average of everybody who took the survey. Everybody who took the survey. And so what's going to follow is the breaking them out by the different groups. So just take a minute to look at that, the different categories there, the different questions. Supporting my spiritual growth was number 4. Number 5, provide outreach to those in need. 6, offer strong welcome and hospitality. 7, prepare leaders in our parish. 8, offer vibrant weekend mass. 9, preach more effectively at mass, and so on. Just take a minute to take all that in. But I would suggest focusing on that importance index, because that will give you an idea of the percentage that said it's either important or very important. Oh, and if you're wondering if there'll be the slides available, yes, we will create a downloadable PDF that folks can download not long after this webinar. And this webinar, again, will be recorded, and is being recorded, and you'll be able to view it at any time off of the internet. So let's look at some of these comparisons now. Okay, first, we're going to look at survey language. If you remember, there was a Spanish. We had about 100 people respond to that, a little over 100, and we had an English, which was a little over 700 people responded. We compare offer vibrant weekend mass, the Spanish language. Now remember, this is not a racial category, this is a language category. Those who took the survey in Spanish, we compare that orange column to the green column. So we found offering a vibrant weekend mass, 86% of Hispanic Latino respondents said that's important or very important, and 76 of the English survey respondents said that's important or very important. So 10-point spread there. We look preach more effectively at Mass, another 10-point spread. Now here's where it gets interesting. Offer more times for confession. 82% of Hispanic respondents said that's important or very important, and only 48% of those who responded in English. So that's pretty significant. And that's one of the reasons we are breaking these results out by these different groups, because in the original, we'll look back at that. In the original, 53% said it was important. And then what that masks is the 82% of those responding in Spanish. So, something like that has implications for Hispanic ministry, as do all of these, but that one's so pronounced. And then support my spiritual growth. We have 95% of Spanish language respondents said that was important or very important, and 84% of those doing English. Now let's look at the racial category. Now, you noticed I don't have a Black or African American here. I don't have Asian here. I don't have Native American, because the number of folks who checked those categories was so small. It's just not responsible for us to share those results. So you look, offer more times for confession. Again, 63% of Latinos. It wasn't just the Spanish speakers who thought this was important, and 37%. So when we get the English speaking and white, that percentage just keeps going down to 37%. Now, what do we do with this is something that's going to be taken up at the Leadership Summit. But here we can have the understanding that there's some kind of difference between groups there. Preach more effectively at Mass, we see 83% of Hispanic Latinos versus 68% of white respondents. Support for married couples, another big spread. 80% for Hispanics, 62% for white non-Hispanic. And then finally, in using technology more effectively, 56% of Hispanic Latino respondents gave that important, very important, and only 41% of white respondents. So here's another interesting, the faith intensity, we're calling it. Faith is the center of my life is that big green column. Several elements of my life, the orange, I want faith to be more central in my life, the red, and then the blue, determining what role faith plays in my life. And you notice how that last group, folks who are determining what role faith plays in my life, are lower they're lower on most items, but on provide support to single adults, look how that pops up. And other research tells us that a lot of folks in this category, I mean, there's even a name for them. They call them seekers, that they are also more likely than not singles. So look at that. They're asking the church for more at a greater rate than the other groups are. You see, there's quite a difference often between that seeker group and the other groups. Okay, now let's look at education. And remember, that was an important issue, because we had so many people who responded with higher education, with undergraduate degrees and graduate degrees. So it's really important that we look at how do groups with less education fare? Offer more times for confession. Look how that 63%. For the less than high school, kind of towering over, especially the folks with graduate degrees. You look over at preaching more effectively at Mass. There's another one where there's definitely a trend towards the more education you have, the less you think that is a big concern. Now, 2/3 of people with graduate degrees still said that that's important for preaching more effectively at Mass. But this is an even stronger need for folks with less education. Now, what we do with that is another question, and what conclusions we draw. because you have to be careful when you look at these kinds of results in drawing your conclusions, and often the answer is do some more research. So you might say, well, this is very interesting. We're seeing Hispanic folks, people who take the survey in Spanish, and people who have less than high school education saying they want priests and deacons to preach more effectively at Mass. So we have to look a little deeper, maybe spend some time with those groups and unpack that a little bit. And then focusing on youth and young adults, we see the folks with higher education saying that's an important, even more priority, where it's in the 80s versus in the 70s. So often we're talking about what's a matter of degree, because you can't have 50 number one priorities, right? So within the process, and I should mention that the date of Bishop Sis's leadership summit to bring key leaders from the diocese together to determine and discern and reflect on what is this, what directions does this data and the Holy Spirit tell us to go in, will be on March 23rd. So this will be an important one to unpack those variances among these different groups. And then I think we finish up with age. We were unable to break the age groups out too finely, so it grouped some of the age groups into young adults, meaning those under 40, using the Vatican definition of youth there, middle-aged, 40 to 59, and then seniors 60 plus. Apologize if you're 60 years old and feel like you're not a senior, but just for convenience, we brought these different groups together. And you see young adults prioritizing reaching out to non-practicing Catholics less than those who are older. But young adults also provide support for single adults. There it is again. So we can kind of pull from this that young adult seekers are looking for more support. Under more times for confession, interesting, the seniors are the lowest. We could read a lot of things into that, but there it is. And it's actually the middle age group that is looking for that more than the young or the old, interestingly enough. Okay, so now we're going to move focus to the diocese. We had a focus on parish, and most of us Catholics, that's where we meet the church, right? But there's also the bishop's ministries for the diocese, which are both helping the parishes, providing services and support and so forth. But there's also ministries that emanate from the diocese. There's prison ministries and Catholic charities and so forth, and university ministries and all. So what the survey asked was how important it is for the diocese to focus on these specific items over the next 5 years. And see, again, we have them ranked, and I'll give you some time to take this in. We have them ranked here. Be effective at forming the next generation in the Catholic faith, provide training to priests so that they may more effectively lead our parishes, promote marriage and family life. Those are our top three, all in the 90s, And then, of course, respect for right to life, vocations to the priesthood, be a voice for justice, peace, and human life. And those are all in the 80s. So even though be a voice for justice, peace, and human life is in number 6 place, it's in the 80s. So we find that these are trending very high. And then we go down to provide training for lay leaders at 76%. Reach out more to non-practicing Catholics, about the same, 3/4, and then provide resources to help people resist the use of pornography, which is at 2/3. So, even number 9, what you might call last place, is still 2/3 of people say it's important or very important. But again, that's part of the planning process, is to discern if we've got 9 priorities, we probably won't do any of them well. So what do we want to focus on? That's a question, I think, for the leadership summit. But these results give you the indication of the difference in importance. Now remember, this is the average of all. Now we go into survey language, where we start with English and Spanish there. Provide resources to help people resist the use of pornography. We had strong differences. This is what we call variance. And anything that's listed, there's lots of variances, but sometimes they might be the difference between 71% and 72%. That's not that interesting. It's pretty much, the same. But what we pulled was the three most different in that particular set of groups. So 79% of Hispanic Latinos want the church to provide resources to help people resist the use of pornography, and 64% of English respondents, English writing and speaking respondents, promote respect for the right to life. Those taking the survey in Spanish into the 90s, but the English taking the survey in English had 84%. And then reaching out more to non-practicing Catholics, Hispanics again are higher. The variance did trend to typically be higher in almost every item for folks taking the survey in Spanish, but the variance differed. Okay, so that spread, that difference between the two, rose and fell depending on the item. Okay, now let's look at race. Again, the pornography question, about 3/4 of Hispanic Latinos and about 6 out of 10 those taking the survey in English. This would be, this would be white versus Hispanic Latino. So again, see, I'm confusing the race and language categories, so I'm sure you're having some confusion with that too. Providing training for lay leaders, much higher, 80% Hispanic Latinos versus 68% for white. And then being a voice for justice, peace, and human life, there's a 5-point spread there. Not that significant, but it's definitely there. Okay, now let's switch to the faith intensity question. Promoting respect for the right to life. That one, again, the spread here by faith intensity. Faith is the center of my life at the highest, determining what role faith plays in my life at the lowest for that one. This is similar to national studies that have been done. The greater what the sociologists call religiosity, the greater concern for the respect for the right to life. We look at pornography, it's similar, although I want faith to be more central in my life pops up there, which shows a desire for more faith intensity. But we see a little stair step in all of these, really, and reaching out to more non-practicing Catholics. So the folks who are figuring out what role faith plays in their life have a less of a priority attached to reaching out to the non-practicing. That's interesting. It still is 2/3 that bring that up. And I know some questions are starting to come in. I think I'm gonna finish going over all the data just to make sure I don't miss anything. But we will come back to these at the end, so keep sending them in. Variance by education. Again, they go in order of higher ed. So less than high school, it's 63% on the pornography question. The graduate degree at the highest. Again, the respect to life, respect for life. It did have a pretty far spread when you look at the highest and the lowest. People with some college at 92% and graduate degree at 79%. That's a pretty big spread there. So again, the difference in education. We said our survey has a lot of people with graduate degrees in college, so that actually brought down the percentage saying that promoting respect for the right to life should be high. So that's something to take into account. And then providing training to lay leaders. Interestingly enough, the highest educated people are saying we want most training, where lower education, less than high school, at 63%. So not as high a priority for that group. Okay, when we look at age, reaching out to more non-practicing Catholics, it's the middle age group again that's high. Find this throughout the survey. The middle age group prioritized more items than the either the young adults or the seniors. Um, and find, promoting healthy marriage and family life. It sounds like, or it appears as if the folks who are at the sort of young adults through middle age are really looking for that from the church, and seniors not so much. Okay, now we're going to move into the person. We had the diocese, we had the parish. Now we're looking at how important are specific items to the respondents. Okay, so here's another one of those long lists. We've got 7 items in this list, and learn more about how to pray is at the top with 93% either saying important or very important. Learn more about church teachings at 92%, and serve the poor at 89%. So this is personally important to the faithful. And we see it goes down to attend social events that allow me to get to know my fellow parishioners, learn how to speak about and share my faith with others in my life. And those kind of are in the 80s. And then we get into the 70s for connect my faith to work and life, and participate actively in the religious education of my children. And not everybody has children, so there's a lot of folks that skip that item. But for folks who did take it, 74% said it's important or very important. But when we rank them, that comes in at number 7. So just give you a second to just take that in a little more. Okay, now we're into the variance by survey language. And here I only give 2 because we have a smaller number of items. Connect my faith to work and family life, only a 6-point spread there with Hispanics. Those who took the survey in Spanish at 80, and those who took it in English at 74. And serve the poor. The Hispanic group cracks into the 90s with that. I'm sorry, I said Hispanic group again. I'm sorry, I'm confusing the two. Uh, Now we're on to the Hispanic, Latino versus white, or if you use the word Caucasian. Participate actively in the religious education of my children, up at 80, and then serve the poor, higher on the white. One of the first times that's happened. And then, but not very distant. So you can see on race, these different items did not come out that differently. We look at faith intensity, there's a little bit of difference. Folks who are determining what role faith plays in their life, only at 62, versus connect my faith to work family life at 78%. So folks who are more engaged in the church will tend to want more of that versus folks who are less engaged. Learn how to speak about and share my faith with others in my life. Again, we have a little bit of that stair step going on. The more intense your faith, the more you want to do that. And then serve the poor at 90% for faith is the center of my life. And more 66%, 2/3, but still relatively different. When we look at education, the difference by education, the participate actively in the religious education of my children. The more education you have, the more interested you are in participating in religious education of your children. That seems to be our result here. And serve the poor. Again, the education. It seems that folks on the 3 bars on the left are have a stronger interest and commitment in serving the poor than folks with undergraduate and graduate degrees. Now, remember, since our survey was taken more by people with undergraduate and graduate degrees, it masks a higher percentage probably around among the faithful that would say that serving the poor is very important or important to them. So we'll move on to age. And again, it's that middle group that comes in highest, connecting my faith to my work and family life. And when it comes to church teachings, it's the young adults and middle-aged who want to learn more, and seniors drop down a little bit. Still 85%, but it is interesting, the difference there. Okay, so now we get into the listening sessions and focus groups. Now, if you recall, during the fall, I might have met some of you at these. We had 8 bilingual regional parish listening sessions at St. Angelo, Abilene, Brownwood, Big Spring, Midland, Odessa, Fort Stockton, and Ozona. And in those sessions, we had questions that folks, if you remember, you sat at table groups, and then we collected what different table groups had to present and kind of looked at what some of the themes were in that. And then there were focus group sessions that were kind of special interests, special ministries, populations. Because sometimes when you get into a big group, like for example, if there aren't a lot of young people at your parish and you have a parish listening session where 2 people under 40 show up to it, you're not going to really hear the voice of young people. So we had both youth and young adult focus group sessions to kind of get those voices and make sure Catholic Social Services getting the voice of the poor, prison ministries, rural life, and so forth. You can see all those groups listed there. Wonderful focus group sessions. I led maybe 40% of those. Many of them were led by leaders here, some of the folks even on this call. So shout out, thank you to you all. And we'll unpack now what were some of the themes that came out of those sessions. All right, so we want to start first with the positive. What's going well and what should be maintained and developed? There was great enthusiasm for different aspects of church at these sessions, and we want to kind of lift those up right now. The first was Eucharistic adoration. When we think of prayer forms that people really appreciate, and the folks who showed up at these meetings tend to be people who are, engaged at least somewhat in church life. So Eucharistic adoration, praying the rosary, that there is a positive aspect of, there is a promise of social media and technology. This was not the highest rated in our survey, but it did come out in our conversations, folks saying that this has tremendous advantages for us for preaching the gospel, new ways of preaching the gospel. And imagine what it must have been like at the time of the invention of the printing press. What that meant to evangelists, that we're at in the digital age, we're at the cusp and the learning time associated with that technology. So great promise there. Small group experiences. People really value those Bible studies, those sharing groups, those prayer groups, and want to see more of it. Retreats again came up again and again and again in both our English and Spanish language sessions. And international priests, and this was interesting. There was, a couple of like caveats with that, but folks really strongly value the presence of international priests and the work that they do in the diocese, the ministry they do in the diocese. But they say that it's especially effective when international priests have accent reduction and cultural training, so they better understand our own uniquely American Catholic culture and cultures within that, and work on reducing the accent. Anyone who's traveled around the country knows, people travel to Texas and they say they can't understand, and then you go to their home state and you can't understand them. It's still English, right? So accent reduction and cultural training are important. And then pro-life values and activities that folks said these are important things for our faith, and we certainly saw that in the survey. So we move on now to deeply held concerns. And if you don't see the concern that you brought with you, It doesn't mean that it wasn't important. It just means that it wasn't widely felt across many of these listening sessions and focus groups. So the first is develop a stronger culture of welcoming. And that was both seen on the sort of the negative side that, we're not welcoming enough, but also on a positive side of, I've gone to my neighbor's church and they're so welcoming and they're just bursting at the seams. We need to be doing this too. Engaging youth in new and vibrant ways. There's both a mourning of lack of numbers of youth and young adults, of course, too. I think that's a separate item in new and vibrant ways, that we can't just do what we're doing, stronger and expect to have different results. And the same thing's true with young adults. Engaging parents in ways that teach them about the faith and strengthens the domestic church, helping them catechize. So that's a mouthful. It kind of includes a few different items, but engaging parents would be the thing that I would just underscore. And then how we do that came up many times, about helping teach parents about the faith, strengthen the domestic church, and then help those parents teach their own children. Increased cooperation and collaboration among parishes. There wasn't a single person that said, you know what, we need to be left alone more. We need to not get together with our neighbors. We need to just stand alone. There's none of that, but there was a strong voice for doing more things together among the parishes. And then around adult Bible study, this was interesting because it was like two dimensions to it and other kinds of faith formation, but particularly Bible study. The first is for the growth of our faith, but the second is to defend the faith. And this really came out in the Bible Belt areas, which I'll mention again in a second. But that, when there was a kind of almost a demand for more Bible study and faith formation, it wasn't just about growing in one's own faith. It was also defending a faith in a culture that can sometimes be hostile, both from the secular point of view, but also from more fundamentalists and some evangelicals and Pentecostals and so forth. So we'll continue that list. Enough concerns, we couldn't fit them on one slide. Implement more transparent policies, and that was came out of not just the sex abuse crisis. We did this shortly after the awful news about Cardinal McCarrick, and then certainly other in the Vatican and so forth. Lots of conversations about the sex abuse crisis. That certainly was part of it, but also financial abuse was mentioned. Folks wanting to know just what's happening financially in our parish. And even, someone, I remember specifically, someone mentioned, how strong is the priest retirement fund? He at least didn't know and wanted to know. So implementing more transparent policies, excuse me, and widely communicating the results. Assisting shared parishes. Now, shared parishes, if that's a new term for you, is a parish that has more than one cultural or linguistic group in it. Say it's there's kind of a white Anglo community, there is a Filipino community, and there's a Hispanic community, each with their own languages. Even though there's cross attendance and so forth, there are distinct communities, and many parishes have aspirations of unity. There's neither Jew nor Greek in Christ Jesus, right? Paul tells us. But also there is some intercultural conflict. So there's parishes that need more help with that. Helping parishioners encounter Jesus and develop their relationship to Christ, but then also equip them to evangelize. Establishing consistency in sacramental policies and reform legalistic sacramental policies. Make it easier to meet with Jesus. Just to give you a quick example, there was someone who told a story about being turned away from a parish when they went for confession because they weren't members. These all, I shared this with the priest council, and they were horrified by this. So this is not exactly endorsed, but seems to be popping up here and there. You must attend this retreat or you can't be confirmed, which certainly isn't written in canon law anywhere. There's people who have these stories and they voice them, and together it creates a sense that there is some concern about the legalistic aspect there. And then there was also a concern, and this was even more widely felt, that there's difference in sacramental policies from parish to parish. So, if you want to get married and you don't like the policy here, well, you go across the street, or certainly with sacrament of confirmation and so forth. So, making it easier to meet Jesus was the kind of the call from that. And then offering pastoral care to single parents, parents of disabled children, elderly, and the poor. So special pastoral care for specific groups that were mentioned. And this is not to say that we don't offer pastoral care to other groups, but these were groups that, you might, to use the language of Catholic teaching, a preferential option for, meaning special attention to single parents, parents of disabled children, elderly, and the poor. Interestingly, even though the English survey, working with the poor, is certainly high on the list for lots of English speaking and folks who attended the sessions in English, it was named by only the Spanish speaking groups only. So now those were generally widely felt issues of concern. We're going to turn to special local needs because, I have here a little picture of the diocese. It's big, and I'm an outsider. I grew up in Louisiana, but I live in New Jersey now, and came down and traveled all over West Texas and found really unique parts of it. And you know this better than me. So the rural areas are gravely feeling the effects of the priest shortage, and certainly they appreciate the priests who are there that they're sharing, but they're really feeling it strongly in the sense of sacraments, that it's harder to get the sacraments they're looking for, and that also that shared parish phenomenon is even harder, particularly when you have lots of immigrant workers move into an area during a boom time or a labor shortage, and be part of a parish, and it's a kind of a culture shock, and that whole shared parish phenomenon needs even more attention. Bible Belt areas, need for biblical self-defense. This was really pronounced in certain parts of the diocese where the fundamentalist churches, the evangelical churches, and Pentecostal churches are especially strong. And then finally, meeting the challenge and opportunity of the strong influx of new people into oil-producing areas. That there are many people who have come into the Midland Odessa area. This was pronounced particularly by folks in those listening sessions, that, hey, there are these people here, and some of them are coming to church, and that's creating great opportunities. But the challenge is the ones who aren't. And when you think especially of single and commuting workers who are commuting long distances, there's a lot of pastoral needs there. So these were the three major deeply felt local needs that we found. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to move out of the show and get us back into the okay, so I'm sorry. I don't have a producer. Our producer got sick, so there was supposed to be somebody taking care of all the technology while I just did the presentation. So please forgive my clumsiness at times. So we've got a few questions already coming in, but I want to, before I go into those questions, I want to give you a chance. We just have a couple right now, but I want you to take a look again at the results. I'm going to scroll through these slides slowly, and I want you to just take a piece of paper and a pen and write down either a question you have or a response, something you'd like to say, an insight you have about these results. I'm certainly somebody who has spent months reading through them and putting these slides together and thinking about, this group and that group and the variances and so forth. But you may have some insights too that the others need to hear. Everybody is muted, so if you've been talking into your phone, no one's hearing you. But the way to be heard is to write something in that question box. And I'm going to say, it doesn't have to be a question necessarily. So now we're moving into that parish focus. And let's take a little time to go through this that importance index, and you could even get down to who said it was very important. You notice if we do it by who said very important, we might change the rankings a little bit. But we have that importance index to kind of count in those who said important as well as very important. Here we have the survey language, and offer more times for confession. This is the great um, opportunity to point out how we need to be cautious about. Oh, somebody says you can't see the screen. Let's make sure we're sharing the screen. Okay, that's better. Okay, so let's go back to that. Now, just take a look at that. And see what you think of that. Let me move into the differences by language. And what I was going to point out there is the offer more times for confession. We looked at English group, 48, 82% Spanish. So, what might we conclude from that? Probably the craziest thing to conclude is that people who speak Spanish have more sins to confess. That would be a mistake to conclude that. We also might conclude people who are Spanish speaking take their faith a lot, maybe almost twice as more seriously than English speakers. So either stereotype probably won't lead us to the truth. And throughout, we have opportunities here to look at the difference between white and Hispanic Latino. This should not lead us into stereotypes of one group or the other. However, it should have us asking questions about why this group, for example, offer more times for confession again, why this group has such a higher percentage than the other group. Certainly the preaching question, I've been puzzling over that for some time. What I would want to do is ask a question of people in both groups and say, what do you make of this? And unpack that a little bit. Hopefully we'll have some time to do that at the leadership summit. So I'll just be moving through these, and then we'll get into your questions in a moment. All right. I think I'm going to stop here and start going into some questions. Okay. Is the language, here's a question. Peggy submitted a question. Is the language in right to life include abortion, death penalty, euthanasia, all human dignity? This is a great question, Peggy, because it gets into the importance of phrasing questions. Okay. So when we say the importance, promote respect for the right to life, um, I have to say that the answer is whatever people are believe themselves when they answer. Does it? So a question to ask you and all of the participants is, do people in the Diocese of San Angelo generally understanding right to life as strictly abortion, as slightly enlarged to include euthanasia, or is it all life issues from conception until natural death? Pope Francis began to frame care of God's creation as a right to life issue. We are all living on this planet together, and without a healthy planet, there is no life on the planet. So you can begin to get into all kinds of issues here. And the question would be, is when people read that question, do they read it the same? And that's an important question. And that's one reason you see down in number 6, be a voice for justice, peace, and human life. The question is asked in a slightly different way. And we see 81% said it's either important or very important. Now we go back up to number 4, it's 87% say promote respect for the right to life. What I would begin to infer from that is that there's probably 6% of people in the group see it as just abortion, um, or or some other combination of things that are not listed in be a voice for justice, peace, and human life, but a more restrictive view of respect for the right to life. We look at the bishop's documents and the Gospel of Life by Pope John Paul II, that encyclical. There is a more expansive view, but it also does give a special privilege to the issue of abortion, euthanasia, the kinds of non-negotiable. We perhaps would want Bishop Sis to weigh in on this. I'm sorry, I just thought I got another question coming in. Bishop Sis might weigh in on this, drawing from the different teachings of the Pope and the bishop. So, Bishop, if you want to write any clarification of the way you see it, if you're on the line today. So let's go to the second question on the resist the use of pornography. And Peggy, thanks again for the question. Resist the use of pornography. Why not also resist premarital sexuality, drug use, and so on? A good question. As we developed the questions, we set some priorities. There was always attention on reducing the length of the survey so that we could help reach more people. Because the longer your survey is, the more people are going to quit as they continue it. So I want to ask if folks have any other additional questions. We've got a couple that have come out, but we want to hear from anybody else. And just pause here for a second. And Peggy, just to continue that, we could make a long list. That the more items that are on the list, the more it's going to be a what social scientists call a double-barreled or a triple-barreled question, where it actually tells you nothing because you've listed many things. So we'd have to separate this out, each one. If that's a priority for the Diocese of San Angelo, we can do that. But regarding this one, on the committee that put it together, there was a sense that this was a in the internet age a particularly important issue. So I'm not seeing any additional questions. So I'd like to ask folks as we finish up. I'd like to ask folks to join me in praying for this pastoral planning process. Pastoral planning is praying and thinking about the actions of the Holy Spirit in this place and in this time. And in order to do that, we need to get the sense of the faithful. What's happening in people's lives? What are they prioritizing? And Bishop Sis has titled his planning process for the diocese, A Future Full of Hope. And I'd like to ask you now to pray to the Holy Spirit, to our Lord Jesus Christ, to God the Father, for a future full of hope, for clarity as the leadership summit takes place, as folks gather on March 23rd to digest these findings, and that you inspire our bishop, inspire other leaders, inspire all of the faithful to help develop a plan to move into the next few years and to build that future full of hope. And will you join me in praying the prayer that Jesus taught us? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. God bless you, and thank you for attending this webinar on the Diocese of San Angelo's survey and listening session results.